Okay, so here we are. This is the first lecture on Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is on government. Now, Chapter 6 talks about the proper functions of government and why we need a strong central government. You know, a free enterprise system cannot function without a strong central government. And so that's what Chapter 6 is all about. And then in Chapter 7, we get into fiscal policies, which are policies of the federal government to try to counteract the ills of inflation and unemployment. You know, the tools that the federal government has to influence the economy. That's what Chapter 7 is all about. So anyway, this chapter is on just government, and I've got some articles here as usual. The first one here is from today's Wall Street Journal on in the money and in investing section, and it just says central banks edge towards central planning. Now, one point I'm going to make to you is that there's a world difference between the world that you live in and the world I lived in when I was your age. And the basic difference is that when I was growing up, there was a lot more competition. We couldn't really call it free enterprise, but there was a lot of competition, and markets dictated a lot of what happened economically. Today, however, we're headed toward, in fact, we've reached a point where there's a lot more economic concentration. There's less competition in your world than there was in my world when I was your age. And that's really the basic difference between the world I grew up in and the world that you're growing up in. And that's one of the points that this article here makes. It says central banks edge toward central planning. Now, what is the key idea of Austrian economics? Or in Friedrich Hayek's book, The Road to Serfdom, what was the road that led to serfdom?
Too much control from the government, from regulations.
Yeah, right. Planning, but you're also right. There's a different way of putting it. But the key word that Friedrich Hayek was talking about is planning. Once you have a planned system, then in order for that plan to work, everyone has to participate in the plan. And if you're unwilling to participate in the plan, then the system will find ways to force you to participate in the plan. And that's how people lose their personal freedom. I mean, this is the whole point to Friedrich Hayek's book, The Road to Serfdom. Okay? And what this says here is that even in our monetary policies through our central bank, we're leading more and more towards central planning. See, in other words, when I was your age, there was a lot more competition, first of all, in the banking industry. There were a lot of hundreds of independent banks, and they would lend money to people with the best economic ideas, or who are the most credit-worthy people. And the investments that took place would grow the economy and generate jobs. Where today that's becoming less so, even in the United States. Today, the point of this article here is that today more and more loans are being made for political reasons. That the government and those are in control have an agenda, and more money is being lent to people who support that agenda. It's not being lent to companies that will bring about the best chance of growth, but it's more and more of it's being lent to people who simply support the political agenda. So that's a big difference, all right? Anyway, it's an interesting article there. The other article I've got for you is actually from the Roanoke Times, and it says here Madison was no party animal. James Madison was the author of our Constitution, and so it says James Madison, the father of the country's Constitution and drafter of the Bill of Rights, knew that political parties, or factions as he called them, would cause problems in a democracy. See, what is the danger in a pure democracy?
You have no republic.
Well,
That's no solution.
you can have
Oh, the minority doesn't benefit.
yeah. You see who wins in a democracy? The majority.
Yeah, the majority.
The majority, right? You vote and the majority wins. Well, what is the danger in that? Well, the danger in that is that the majority therefore has a power to take everything away from the minority. And that's why we don't, our forefathers under James Madison favored a system that was a republic. And what is the purpose, and what is a republic? A republic is a system based on law, the rule of law. And what is the purpose of many of these laws? Well, the purpose of many of these laws is to protect the minority from the majority. So if a republic is fashioned a certain way, then you have a balance. You have a democracy in one hand, where people have a say-so in what happens, but then you have a republic on the other hand that limits the power of the majority in taking everything away from the minority. But this system can get out of whack, and that's sort of what's happened. I mean, the pendulum has swung from when I was young, where we had more laws protecting the minority, to whereas today that's less the case. For example, and I'll give you some examples. One example is that the Sherman Antitrust Act. The Sherman Antitrust Act was passed in 1890, and the purpose of the Sherman Antitrust Act was to protect the minority from monopoly, from too much economic concentration. And for years, for 100 years, more than 100 years, when a industry became too concentrated, that the government would bring suit against them, and according to the Sherman Antitrust Act, they would force them to divest themselves of some of their holdings, because the purpose is that the minority can only be protected if we have sufficient sufficient competition. See, but what's happened lately is that it's been many years since any industry has been brought to court through the Sherman Antitrust Act. I mean, it's a dead letter law today. It's not enacted, because instead of seeing the ill effects of too much economic concentration, there's actually reasons that were given that favor more economic concentration. So whether you agree with that or not, that's simply the fact that the economy has become more and more controlled by the few. For example, when I was your age, there were thousands of independent news media. And when I was your age, investigative journalism was a prized occupation. Investigative journalism was when a journalist would spend time investigating this or that. It may take them weeks or even months, and then they would come out with this story or that story. Today, investigative journalism doesn't even exist. when I was your age, there were thousands of independent news media. Today, 6 corporations control 90% of all news. See, that's economic concentration. And that's what we're faced with today. And I do have a video for you that's a little bit strong, but this is a video, it's an interview with Paul Craig Roberts. Paul Craig Roberts was one time the Assistant Secretary General of the United States. He served, in politics, high office. He was president of a major university. He's got a doctorate in economics. He's written and published 12 books. So he's a very accomplished person. So I think you're going to find this interesting. It'll give you some food for thought. It's about. I'm coming in at the tail end of this. The whole interview is 34 minutes. Let's see. I'm coming in. I think I want to come in at 23 minutes. 23. You see. Yeah, that's good enough.
A conspiracy? Is it planned? Is it organized? Or is this just part of the culture that's moving us in this direction?
It's both. We've had all of this free market propaganda for years. And it was a response to Roosevelt and the New Deal. And even when I was doing graduate work in economics, 50 years ago, the only free market my professors could identify was small farm agriculture, which was already disappearing into corporate agriculture. There's no such thing as a free market in the United States. It requires many producers, none of which can affect price. Well, where we see we have concentration. Look at the banks. The banks are so concentrated they're too big to fail. Well, how do you have capitalism if a failed enterprise doesn't close down? Instead, it's bailed out by the people, by the Federal Reserve, printing money to buy up its worthless portfolio. This is not capitalism. There's no capitalism here. And this is an oligarchy in which the distribution of income and wealth in the United States in the last 20 years is now worse than in many third world bandit countries. So you don't have an economy anymore. There's no growth in real consumer income. So how does the economy grow? Can't. People's incomes aren't growing. It doesn't. There's nothing to push the economy. There's no consumer demand. Why would people invest? Why would corporations invest? So it's, in a way, it's, we can financialize everything. We can collect up all the surplus in the society in bank fees and interest by issuing more debt. The more debt we can issue, the more of the country's income is drawn off in fees and interest. And that's the way this system works. This is not capitalism. The financial system really doesn't finance industry. It creates debt instruments. It takes economic rents, which should be taxed, instead capitalizes them into instruments that provide interest to the financial sector.
When I was a young man,
this has to do with capitalism.
when I was a young man, or younger, we were continuously facing monopoly lawsuits, whether to break up AT&T, whether to break up IBM. Rockefeller, 50 years before that, was to break up Standard Oil. But it's been a continuous fight for 100 years. Except in the last 25 years, I do not recall a single Sherman Act prosecution being brought. Even though we've had more concentration, which you would think would beg more of these questions, I haven't seen one. That is, to me, how dramatic the shift is. So we've lost capitalism, and the point I would make, and what I would observe is, when you have that competition, you get more for less. But when you don't have it, you get less for more, and it's stretched even thinner. And it seems to be what we've fallen into. Is that a fair observation?
Yes, it is. The Sherman Antitrust Act now is a dead letter law. And the argument is, oh, we can't compete unless we have massive firms. The globalism. Globalism means for America to compete, essentially everything has to end up in the hands of a few people. They have to be massive firms in order to compete. So this type of argument, which was created by economists, paid off by corporations, with research grants, consulting fees, board memberships. Some of them even got Nobel Prizes. They created this notion that, oh, the Sherman Antitrust Act, that would endanger our competitive ability. So they turned it on its head. You see, the whole purpose of the Sherman Antitrust Act was to ensure competition. But they say, oh, but now the competition is global. We have globalism, and we're competing with other countries and trading blocks in China, oh, China. So we have to have massive corporations. So I think that there's been that sort of shift. And when the economists think and talk and write that way, then the regulators follow.
I think they've got the cart in front of the horse, because anybody that sat in a board meeting of a major corporation, you'll quickly find out that the members there are from all around the world. There's no saying that they're American. They're representing the Japanese pension fund or whatever, and so they're global in their perspective. And you could say, well, they're U.S. domiciled. Well, with special purpose entities, etc., the money's all kept offshore anyway. So what is an American corporation anymore? Because they're global corporations. So I understand where they want to be competitive, but I don't know if that's necessarily helping America.
Well, I'm not saying that argument is correct. I think it's a ruse. It's a cover. It's a cloak for enrichment of the 1%. I don't believe the argument that they've made up that stands the Sherman Antitrust Act on its head. It's just a ruse, like everything else. I mean, everything they tell you is self-serving. What has the government said that's true? Think of anything? Can you think of anything they've said that's true? We know the unemployment rate report is false, the inflation rate's false, the gross domestic product number is false. We know all of this. We know that Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction. He did not have Al-Qaeda connections. We know that Assad of Syria did not use chemical weapons. We know that Russia did not invade Ukraine. But they say this over and over and over. I can't think of one thing that the government or the corporate world has said in 20 years that's true.
Well, a recent survey says 60 to 70% of Americans believe exactly what you just said. They don't trust the government. They don't trust Washington.
Well,
but I don't think they know what they can do about it, because the candidate list they have seems to give them no choice, or little choice.
Well, that's a good sign. If 60 or 70% are catching on, things can change. If the people can catch on despite the news being nothing but a propaganda mechanism, this is a very good sign. And once the people catch on, enough of them, and you already got a majority catching on, oh boy, yes, things can change then.
Is that why Donald Trump is so popular on one side, Bernie Sanders on the other side? Because they're clearly non-traditional candidates.
Yeah, I think that's the reason they're both popular, despite other things that they do and say. And whether this is real or ruse, I have no idea. But I welcome it, because it certainly is causing discomfort for the establishment in the Democratic Party and the establishment in the Republican Party. And there's nothing to be more welcome than to discredit those two establishments. The Democratic and Republican establishment both are totally corrupt. They have no concept of the country or the interests of the country. They have only concept of self-interest for them, for their benefactors. So Sanders and Trump are refreshing. I hope they're real. It doesn't mean they can win, because there's powerful forces arrayed against them. But we'll just have to see. And it doesn't mean if they win, they know what to do. I mean, they can challenge and say challenging things, but does Trump really know what needs to be done? And who will he end up relying on?
Well, he's going to put Carl Icahn in charge of global trade negotiations now, so he's already picking his candidates.
Yeah. Well, I think on the whole it'd be hard for either Trump or Sanders to bring any positive changes, for the reasons I said earlier in our discussion, our conversation. They don't have a movement. They don't know the people. They don't know who. First of all, they don't know what needs to be done, or they only know a few things, and so they'll end up captive. They'll be a captive. In the end, the powerful Roman emperors were captives of the Praetorian Guard, and if the guard didn't like it, they removed them.
We're up against our hard line. Great conversation. There's so much more to go here. So many more questions I'd like to ask you. We'll have to have you back on another day. Thank you very much, Dr. Roberts. Is there a site, place that people could go to follow your writings, your work, other interviews?
Yes, there's a website. It's just my name, www.paulcraigroberts.org, and they can find what I have to say there.
Thank you.
Let's see. Well, any questions about any of that? That was longer than usual, but any comments about anything he said? No comments. Okay. Well, let's get to these slides then. Let's see. Slideshow from beginning. So, what is market failure? A condition that arises when unrestrained operation of markets yields socially undesirable results. Now, what we've talked about a lot in this course so far is how free markets work. Chapter 4 was on demand and supply, and it was a discussion of markets. And what we've talked about so far this period is that we really don't have a free enterprise system. There's really no such thing. We have a managed system, and so the question becomes, well, why do we have to modify a free market system? And the answer is that a free market system would lead to many undesirable results. For one thing, a free market system ultimately would lead to a concentration of power. So we're going to talk here about why we can't rely on a totally free market system, and what are the reasons that we have to modify the system. I mean, what are these market failures? I mean, how does a free market fail us? Exactly. And that's what, there are many reasons, and we're going to talk about these different reasons. Yeah.
Isn't it because of excessive government regulations?
Well, the point I'm making is that we need government regulation. That's the whole point. See, the whole point is that a free market system is going to fail us, so we need government regulation. However, and I'm glad you asked that question. However, there's good regulation and bad regulation. See, for example, I've already mentioned the Sherman Antitrust Act. Well, the Sherman 1890 law, that was to protect us from monopoly power. So that's a regulation. See, the Sherman Antitrust Act, the free market would lead to a concentration of power. So the government comes in, puts in passes a law, the Sherman Antitrust Act, which helps the little guy in assuring ample competition. Of course, the point I made is the Sherman Antitrust Act is null and void today in today's world. But that is an example of government regulation. And let me give you another one. One of the causes of the Great Depression was that banks were taking depositors' money and putting that money at great risk. And of course, with any risky investments, once things start to head south, once the economy starts to head south, then it's those risky investments that are hurt most, are first. And so commercial banks were taking depositors' money and then risking that money and losing that money, hurting the common, every person who's putting their part of their paycheck into banks. So what happened in 1932 is that we came out with the Glass-Steagall Act. And what the Glass-Steagall Act did is that it said, okay, we know that wealthy individuals need a playground, so we're going to have this group called investment banks, and we're not going to regulate them. Now, an investment bank will only do business with people with a minimum of $1 million. In fact, there was an article in the paper just a couple of days ago about an investment company who has a minimum now of $10 million. I mean, if you don't have at least $10 million, they won't even look at you. So these are investment banks. And so the government said, well, those people, they're adults and it's their money, and if they want to take great risk, well, that's up to them. But we're going to regulate commercial banks because it's unfair that commercial banks take depositors' money and put it at great risk. So we're going to help protect the little guy who simply has a bank account. And so the Glass-Steagall Act served us quite well until the year 2000. And what happened in the year 2000 is that the investment banks were making so much money at these, like in the derivatives market, that the commercial banks said, well, we want to take part in those risky investments. So by the practice of rent seeking through putting money in a DC, through lobbyists, etc., Congress repealed the Glass-Steagall Act. And Congress said, well, okay, now commercial banks, you once again can put depositors' money at great risk. Now, see, this is an example of exactly what we're talking about here. You've got a free market system will ultimately lead to a concentration of power, so we need government regulation. The Sherman Antitrust Act protected the little guy. The Glass-Steagall Act protected the little guy. See, these are good government involvement, good government regulations that help the little guy. But see, in both cases, the Sherman Antitrust Act is no longer enforced, and the Glass-Steagall Act was repealed and is no longer. Any questions about that? Okay, well, how does the government establish and enforce rules of the game? It safeguards private property and enforces contracts. So what is the role of government? So here we have different reasons why a capitalistic system needs a strong central government. See, for one, a strong central government establishes a uniform system of weights and measures. I mean, a foot to us here in Virginia is the same as a foot to people in California, right? A foot is a foot. A pound is a pound. If I say I bought a gallon of milk, well, you know what a gallon is. You and I agree in what a gallon is. People all over the United States agree in what a gallon is, correct? But you can't have this agreement on how long a foot is or how long a yard is unless you have some central authority that will establish a uniform system of weights and measures. So we need a strong government to do that, because a free market system can't function without it. All right? A strong national defense. We're way beyond the point where we can protect ourselves from a foreign adversary with a militia. In this atomic age that we live in, it takes a big military, and so you need a big government to have a big military to protect us from other big militaries. Yeah.
Are we in the process of actually making our military smaller, or just our forces decrease in size?
Yeah. Over the past several years, yes, we have.
And why is that?
Why is that? Well, it's a political. I mean, the decision of either to make the military bigger or smaller is a political decision, and it's just the presidents that we've had, has favored, put more emphasis on social programs and less emphasis on the military.
Now, how does that correlate to what's going on now in overseas, I guess in Syria and that part of the world?
Oh man,
and then,
that's
I mean, because
that is
we're in the process of decreasing the size of the military, but now
that's a good question.
The fact that we're using drones too, and not using practically any ground forces.
Well, that's a very good question. In fact, this is something that Paul Craig Roberts actually talks about. For many years, there was great effort to diffuse any confrontation amongst nuclear powers.
Is that
China's a nuclear power, Russia's a nuclear power. Of course, we're a nuclear power, and there was a lot of energy to establish trust amongst the nuclear powers. But lately, and Syria is a good example, there's been more support for confrontation. This it's called saber rattling that's going on in Syria, and causing contention between the United States and Russia is a very dangerous thing, because both China and Russia have more powerful military forces than we do, and together we don't have a chance. So our only ace in the hole is nuclear power, and it's very dangerous to support any policies that could possibly lead to a nuclear war.
Is it also on the scale of geographically too? Because we're on the other side of the world, whereas Russia and China are also on that side of the world, causing it they have closer access to the actual
Well, I don't know that geographic location is less of a factor than it used to be. Especially our more advanced military weapons can go long distances. But let's not get bogged down on this. I want to answer your question, but let's stick to the program here. The point I'm making here is that there are reasons that we need a strong central government. Another reason we need a strong central government is to provide us with public goods. Well, what is a public good? Well, public good is something that once it exists, everyone can benefit from it and no one can be excluded from it. For example, roads is a public good. Now, if it weren't for government, how would we build roads? Well, the only way to build roads without government is to have private investors build roads, and then they would get paid by putting up tolls. So every road that we would drive on, we would have to pay a toll. So you'd drive for a mile or two and then pay a toll and then get on someone else's road and drive for a mile or two and pay a toll and then get off to someone else. And not only that, but with no central government, there would be no uniformity in the road. Some would be narrow, some would be wide, some would be asphalt, some would be gravel. And now, can you imagine driving from here to Roanoke, certainly from here to California, if roads were built by private investors? I mean, it would be an impossible situation. So, what's the solution? Well, the solution is government. The government taxes us, takes those tax monies, and builds and maintains roads. Now, what taxes go to pay for roads? Now, what would be the most logical tax that would pay for roads? Gas tax, yeah. Every time we buy a gallon of gasoline, we pay a tax. And that money specifically goes to build and maintain roads. So those who use the roads more pay more. Now, is that a fair way of doing it? Yeah, that's a pretty fair way of doing it. Yeah.
But like, how does this differ from like private prisons, where it's like regulated exactly like how you're talking about roads?
You mean we have some toll roads?
Well, yeah, no. How you were saying about like if everyone, like how if like the roads were like private.
Yeah.
But like we have private prisons that are like that.
Well, let's not to get into that. I mean, I don't know enough about prisons to even make a comment on it. But
You still have to pay to be in the prison. Yeah.
You what?
You have to pay to be in the prison, I'm pretty sure, if it's a private prison.
If it's a private prison?
Yeah, you have to pay for your cost and like food and staying there and all that stuff.
Don't you
So more
also
likely you're gonna be in a private prison if you're rich.
Yeah.
Oh,
They
cool.
give you like tennis courts and TVs.
Yeah, tennis courts and TVs.
Like,
Anyway, let's not get too far afield on this. Another example of public good was public education. I mean, if it weren't for, you see, in the fact that you went through 12th grade and you didn't have to pay tuition if you went to a public school, and the fact that your tuition here at New River is highly subsidized, none of you are paying the full cost of your education. It's being highly subsidized by the state of Virginia, and what's the reason your tuition is less than here at New River than it is at Tech and Radford? By the way, in today's paper, there's an article about Tech's tuition. They just raised their tuition 3%, for next year, and if I remember right, the cost now for 2 semesters is about $12,000. That's just tuition. Now compare that $12,000 tuition to what you're paying here at New River. And how come you're paying less for the same course? Because your tuition is more highly subsidized at a community college than it is at a 4-year university. So what we're talking about is public education. Now, you may benefit from this, but how does society benefit from it? Well, society benefits from it because we can have a more prosperous economy and society if the general population is educated. So the reason that we have public education is not only to help the individual, but it's to help all of society. But see, without government, we would have no public education. Without government, who would get the best education? Those with the most money, right? I mean, and people without money may not get any education. So this is one reason. See, that this is what is called market failure. See, what I'm talking about here is, what are some areas where the market fails us, and what have we done about it? Okay. We also need government to protect us against social costs. Now, a social cost is an undesirable byproduct of a free market economy. Something economists call them a negative externality. For example, we like the cars that Detroit gives us, but we don't like the pollution that comes along with the cars. See, the pollution is an undesirable byproduct of the industrial process. And we call that a negative externality. See, it's an externality because it's not really intended, but it's external to our main purpose, and it's negative because it's bad for us and not good for us. There are positive externalities too, but we don't talk about those as much as negative externalities. So see, if it weren't for if we had a free enterprise system and no government and no anti-pollution laws, then we'd all be choking from all the pollution. We'd all be in ill health because of all the pollution. You see, you show me a company that has a social conscience, and I'll show you a company that will go bankrupt. It's impossible. In a free market system, it's impossible for a business to have a social conscience. Why? Well, because let's say there's several companies in the paper industry. Let's say there's 20 companies in the paper industry. And let's say you're one of these owners of one of these companies. And let's say to begin with, there's 20 of us, and we all share the same part of the market, and our costs are the same, and we're producing paper, and the quality is the same. And in other words, we're 20 identical companies. Y'all get the picture? All right, now you come along and you develop a social conscience. You say, well, I feel guilty about running a pipe into the river and polluting the river and letting all my smokestacks just go into the air unfiltered and creating all that pollution. So because you have a social conscience, you put a scrubber in your smokestack, you find alternative ways to dispose of your liquid waste, so you minimize your pollution. And you also feel guilty about your workers being hurt by all these unsafe machines, so you buy safety devices for your machines to limit the injury of your workers. So see, you have a social conscience. But as a result of having a social conscience, what's happened to your costs? They've gone up. If your costs go up, what are you going to have to do to your price to maintain a profit margin? Increase your price. Well, here, consumers walk into the store and there's maybe 5, companies that are selling, reams of paper, and you're one of them. Now your paper's no better than anyone else's because your extra cost didn't go into making a better paper. It just went into all these, safety devices and anti-pollution devices. So your costs were higher, so your price is higher. Well, here's 5 identical packs of paper, and your price is higher than everyone else's. Now, when people come to buy paper, what do you think most of them will do? They're going to buy the lower price paper. And you might say, well, would it make any difference if they knew that your paper was higher priced because you had a social conscience? There may be a few people that say, okay, I'm willing to pay the higher price because I want to support you, but most people would still...
Today's society is going now.
Perhaps, but the point I'm making is that if it weren't for government, we would all be choking from pollution. In other words, a free market system cannot protect us from pollution and unsafe industrial machines and things like that. So we have government that, the solution is to pass pollution law, anti-pollution laws that affect everyone equally. So those without a social conscience are forced to comply, and so you've leveled the playing field in terms of competition. Now, of course, then the question becomes, well, what is a good anti-pollution law? I mean, how far do we go? And there you might have some disagreement, and I'm not going to get into that, debate. But there's no debate on, is this a proper role of government? I mean, should government intervene to protect us from pollution? And on that, there's no debate because there's a universal agreement. Y'all with me on this? Okay, another reason we need a strong central government is that it encourages merit goods. A merit good is something that is good for us and not bad for us. For example, most of the price of a pack of cigarettes is taxes. And one of the reasons for those high taxes is that the government has said, well, smoking is harmful, and so we're going to put a high tax on it, and this may limit, people in terms of how much they smoke.
Didn't New York make it so it's like $20 for a pack of cigarettes or something?
Well, then you're getting into a degree, and I'm not going to get into what is a good law or a bad law and how much we should do this or how much we should do that. I'm simply saying that that there are areas that a free market system fails us, and therefore we need government to protect us from those failures. That's the whole point I'm making. But once you get into particulars, then you get into normative economics, and it's get into opinions, and you're bound to have a wide range of disagreements. But there is no disagreement in that we do need government to protect us from certain things. That the free market does fail us in many areas, and these are the areas that a free market fails us. Helps the poor and disadvantaged people. There's some disagreement on this, of course, but that there's a lot of people in a modern industrial society. A person that does everything right, that's hardworking, through no fault of their own, can lose their jobs. The economy can tank, and people can be out of work. So there are social reasons that we give unemployment benefits, for example. I mean, it's a good idea that when a person loses a job, that the government comes in and pays them a certain amount of money for X amount of time, so that they can get over this hump. Maybe they can, they're not destitute during that time. I mean, they're not living well, but at least maybe they can buy food and shelter, and it gives them time to find another job. And society says, well, that's a proper role of government. That's a good thing. But there's also an economic reason for that. The economic reason is that when people become unemployed, and this is what happened before Roosevelt's New Deal program of the 1930s. At the time of the Great Depression, there were no unemployment benefits. Unemployment benefits came in 1936 or 1937 under Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal programs. So, before that, you had a whole bunch of people become unemployed, and they would simply stop spending money. Demand would go down a whole bunch, and that would lead to a whole lot more unemployment. So if we pay people unemployment benefits, demand stays higher than it would otherwise, and we prevent unemployment from getting as bad as quickly as it would otherwise. Yeah, Lisa?
Does disability and that fall under that too?
Yeah, I would say, disability and, those type of social programs. Now, again, you can get into, a disagreement in terms of degree, but, I'm not going to get into that, but I'm simply saying that, this is a viable role of government, is to, to help protect the poor, disadvantaged, and the unemployed, and like that. Taxes. We need government to impose taxes, and again, there's a lot of disagreement on are taxes too high, or this tax is bad and that tax is better. I mean, you can go on and on like that. But the point is that a society can do a lot of good things with tax money, and you can't tax people without government, and that's the whole point I'm making. We can't have a lot of these other programs without the government receiving revenue. establishes and enforces rules of the game. See, we can have laws, we have what's called the rule of law, but we also need a law enforcement authority. And so we need government to establish law and then to enforce that law. When I was, close to your age, I was teaching mathematics in junior high in the inner city of Detroit. I mean, that was during the race riots, and I remember one day we just looked out the window to watch a robbery going on at the bank across the street, and I mean, it was a very violent time. But I remember in those days in Detroit, this was in the inner city, like I said, of Detroit. The police cars had emblazoned on the doors the protectors of liberty. And I never forgot about that, see, because what does law enforcement do? Well, it protects our liberty. It protects our freedom. Now, the correct laws and the proper enforcement of those laws protect our liberty. I think every police car ought to have that emblazoned on the side, protectors of liberty. Something that a lot of people don't quite comprehend. Promotes competition. Well, this is what we're talking about with the Sherman Antitrust Act. A proper role of government is to protect us from market concentration. But like we talked about earlier in this lecture, that is much less so than it was in earlier years. From 1890 to well over 1990, over 100 years, the government was very, very active in protecting the individual from market concentration, because with monopolies and market concentration, then the individual is put at a great disadvantage. The individual can be taken advantage of. And so the Sherman Antitrust Act helped protect us from big business. But for the last 20 years or so, I don't know if there's been any case where the Sherman Antitrust Act has been enforced. Because what we've experienced is more and more market concentration. The banking industry is highly concentrated. We're controlled by just a handful of big mega banks. The news media is highly concentrated. Like I said earlier, 90% of the news is controlled by 6 corporations, and they control, what is printed or what is, on talk show, on news programs. So we've had this tremendous concentration, and we have not used the Sherman Antitrust Act to protect us from that concentration. In fact, there's been a change in attitude where market concentration is good and not bad. So regulates natural monopolies. Now, there are good monopolies and bad monopolies. A natural monopoly is a good monopoly. It's just natural for certain industries to be monopolistic, to be controlled by one firm. For example, when you buy cable service, do you have a choice?
Yes.
You do?
Guess not.
No.
To a point.
Well, of course, in today's, I got to be careful here, because with the internet and this new technological world, things are certainly changing. But let me just explain to you what a natural monopoly is. Let's say you've got this area that's just being developed. People are moving in. You got 100 people, and then you got 10,000, and you got 50,000, and so you get to a certain point where you need electricity. Now, to provide electricity for this whole big group of people here, it's a lot of expense. Big a big well, it's a big project, with the machines that we need. Maybe we need to build a dam. Maybe we got to run all these wires. I mean, it's a huge amount of expense. And in our market system, this is undertaken by private investors. So a private investor has got to say to himself, if we go in and provide electricity to these people, we're going to make X amount of money in profit. But if we've got competition, then we can't really say for sure how many people are going to buy our electricity, how many customers we're going to have. And there's a great deal of risk here. I mean, we could go in and spend years, spend all this money, and not be successful, not make a profit. So because there's such a high risk here, I'm going to do something else with my money. I mean, there are other places I can go and invest my money where I know I can make a good return with a lot lower risk. So what do we do as a society in this case? Well, what we do is we say to these potential investors, we say, look, you come in, you provide electricity for this area, and we'll pass a law protecting you from competition, at least in this geographic area. I mean, not the whole United States, or not even a whole state, or maybe not even a whole county, but in this some geographic location, we're going to pass a law that says, well, if you come in and you make these investments, we'll make sure you don't have any competition. That you're the only one that that's going to provide electricity. And so what do investors say? Well, they say, well, there's 500,000 people. The majority of them will want electricity. We come pretty close to know what our customer base is going to be, and we can so our risk level is much lower. And yeah, okay, I'm willing to risk my capital and go in and make these investments under these conditions. And that's what's called a natural monopoly. See, it's just natural for electricity to be provided for us through natural monopolies. However, what the government gives with one hand, it almost always takes away with the other. So it provides monopoly status on one hand, but what does it do on the other hand? Well, what it does on the other hand with natural monopolies is that it says to these natural monopolies, we are going to regulate your pricing policies. So that if you want to, first of all, we've got to approve your initial price, and if you want to raise your price, you have to justify why you want to raise it, and if your justifications are valid, we'll let you raise your price. But if we deem that your justifications are not, or your reasons are not justified, then we're not going to allow you to raise your price. So natural monopolies, yes, they're a monopoly that no one can compete with them, but what they give up with, on the other hand, is a freedom to exercise their monopoly power and charge exorbitant prices. See, so
that's because of lack of competition, right?
With lack of competition, a natural monopoly there's no competition. See, so either you buy from us or you can't buy from anyone. But we can't take advantage of that monopoly power because of government regulates our pricing policies. So this has been a good system. This has been a good system. And then this is something we talk a lot about in microeconomics, and this is a bit of microeconomics thrown in here, something that you might get in the second semester. But what traditionally has happened is that these natural monopolies find ways to increase their profits by lowering their costs. You can increase your profit margin either by raising price or by lowering your cost. So if you can't raise your price, you can lower your cost, but that's still socially beneficial. Of course, what happens is that the government may come along mandate lower prices once they lower costs after a while. But anyway, that's I'm not going to get into natural monopolies. Like I say, in microeconomics, we talk a lot about monopolies and natural monopolies, and another name for microeconomics is price theory. Microeconomics is the study of prices, and it's the study of the decision-making process of economics, both individuals and as corporations, as business. But anyway, I don't think I meant to do this previous. Promotes a more equal distribution of income. There's a natural law that says that he who has will give him more, and he who has not, then what he does not have is taken away from him. If you have a bunch of money and you boy, I gotta be careful on this. We live in such a strange world. If you have a bunch of money and you put your money in the bank, what does the bank normally do? Pays you interest, right? Well, why did the bank pay you money? Because you had money, correct? You have money, you put money in the bank pays you interest. Now, today's world, they're not going to pay you much, and we got negative interest rates where people have got to pay the bank instead of the bank paying them. I mean, we live in this totally insane, crazy world. But anyway, you get my drift, right? Now, let's say that let's say you want to go buy a car. You've got, $25,000 cash. You go to buy a car. The car is $25,000. You give him $25,000. The car is yours free and clear. Now, how come you bought the car for $25,000? No more, because you had the $25,000. Now, let's say that you go to buy a car for $25,000, but you don't have $25,000. Let's say you've only got $5,000. So you got to borrow the other $20,000. So, and let's say you take out a 5-year loan. Well, now instead of that car costing you $25,000, it's maybe going to cost you $35,000. Well, why did this car why did a $25,000 car cost you $35,000? Because you didn't have money. You didn't have the money to pay the $25,000. So what was taken away from you? Money, right? $10,000 was taken away from you. Why did the system take $10,000 away from you? Because you didn't have money. See, what you don't have is taken away, and what you do have, you're given more. You see how that works? Interesting how that works, isn't it? So and so much of these things, you all know these things, but one of my roles is to reveal to you things that you already know. Interesting, isn't it? Anyway, promotes a more equal distribution of income. What I'm saying here is that there is a natural law that says that he who has will be given more, and he who has not, then what he does not have is taken away. And what happens over a period of time, because of this law, it's a natural law, we get a grossly uneven distribution of income. And so one of the reasons for government is to counteract that process, you see, and to make it so that there's a more equal distribution of income. But unfortunately, what do we get with with a greater concentration of market power? I mean, one of the things that, a point I've made in this lecture is that in your world, there's much more concentration of power, especially in terms of with government and business, than it was when I was your age. Well, what's one of the results of a concentration of power? Well, the result of concentration of power is a grossly uneven distribution of income. This is why we talk about the 1%. The 1% of the population owns 95% of all resources. We have a huge unequal distribution of income. John Thane of Citigroup just lost his job, and there was an article in the paper, and you know who John Thane is maybe, but he was a key player in the financial collapse of 2007. But how much was John Thane paid? I mean, last year he was paid $12 million. When he quit his job, I mean, his severance pay was, like $50-60 million. I mean, there's a group of people that make a huge amount of money, even in failure. All right? And but how much does the average person make? I couldn't believe it, but I know a couple people that have gotten jobs recently in this area, and I mean, well-educated, college degree jobs for $35,000 a year. Now, if you make $35,000 a year and you count all the taxes you got to pay, all that, and everything else, I mean, you're working for next to nothing. There's been a gross uneven distribution of income. Okay, promotes strives for full employment and price stability, which really brings us into the 7th chapter of fiscal policies. But one of the reasons that one of the justifications for big government, and this would be more true coming from the Keynesian point of view, is that we need government to promote full employment and price stability. Price stability would come from a strong monetary authority like our central bank, the Federal Reserve, or the fiscal authorities coming from the federal government. But there again, you've got a lot of, in other words, even between Austrians and Keynesians, there's an agreement on that. We need a strong central government, but exactly what role should they play and how much, to what extent, there's a big disagreement between Austrians and Keynesians. So anyway, that's just an overview of this chapter. And I'm sure some of this that we get into is definitions. What is a private good? A good that has substitutes and does not have to be shared with others. That's called a private good.
What would an example of that be?
Good question.
You grow apples in your yard.
Yeah.
You have to share your apples.
Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah, anything like that. Yeah, any business, that sells something that, yeah, that's a private good. A public good is something that has to be shared, with the whole public. Private good is something that you can sell, one individual can sell to another individual. And a public good is a good that is available for all to consume, regardless of who pays and who does not pay. Public good are, things provided for us through government. That's why it's public. Private is individuals, public is government. What are some examples of public goods? Public education, national defense, roads. Okay, what is a merit good? Merit goods satisfy a want or a need like public education, safe food, helmets, reliable brakes. The government promotes merit goods, public education, safe food. I appreciate it. I'm a label reader, and when I go to buy food, if I'm not familiar with it, I'll read the label. What's in this? I remember just doing this yesterday, looking at different boxes of cereal, and not buying certain cereal because I didn't like some of the ingredients in it, and without going into detail, I'm glad I can I know what I'm eating. Well, would this be possible without government? No. This is an example of a merit good. I like the idea that we have to have our cars inspected. You know, to have bad brakes, for example, you know, it can not only hurt yourself, but it can, you know, cause accidents and hurt other people. So, I mean, I like the idea that, you know, annually everyone has to have their brakes inspected, and you know, well, that's government promoting a merit good. Okay. Public education is a merit good. It's a public good, but it's also a merit good. I mean, you know, they can be both. So how does government promote merit goods? It subsidizes, subsidies and regulations. See, let me go back. Subsidy, you know, it can subsidize things that it views as favorable. It can regulate. You know, regulations today are so much more than they used to be, and cars, for example, are highly regulated, and you know, cars have to pass certain safety inspections. I mean, look what happened to Volkswagen. You know, poor Volkswagen. That you know, they cut the corners in terms of their anti-pollution devices, and the government put, you know, how much was that fine? 25 billion or something that Volkswagen had to pay. So you know, that this is government being active in promoting, you know, merit goods through regulations. My wife's brother works for the company, by the way, that tests pollution in automobiles, and it was his company that, you know, kind of found out what Volkswagen was doing. But you know, talking to, you know, my wife's brother, he says that we've gotten to the point where they can hardly even measure pollution from our modern cars. I mean, in fact, his company has gone into, you know, other endeavors to supplement that, because he says, hey, you know, I mean, you know, years gone by, you know, cars were very polluting. He says today, I mean, there are almost no pollution. How come? Well, would that happen without government regulation? No, certainly not. And do we all benefit from that? Sure we do. And what are examples? Okay, first party and third party laws might take some explanation. Let's see, I got a couple minutes. Wearing helmets is a first party law. In other words, okay, we have a law that says that you've got to wear a helmet when you drive a motorcycle. Well, who's protected from you wearing a helmet? Well, you're protected, but is anyone else protected? Well, no. And that's why we call this a first party law, because only the first party is protected. But third party laws, like brakes, is a third party law. I mean, a car has to have good brakes. Well, that protects the first party, but it also protects others. See, so we call this a third party law. Now, almost everyone agrees, economists and others agree on third party laws, but there's some disagreement on first party laws. I mean, you know, how much should the government treat us as children? Because that's what first party laws do. They say, well, for your own good, we're going to pass a law saying that you must do this and this and this. Now, if you don't do this, this and this, the only one hurt is you. So, you know, is this parent-child a proper role of government? And that there's some disagreement. Some people say that the government ought not be involved in first party laws. But there is agreement on third party laws. Because with third party laws, it's not only the individual that can be harmed, but it's other people as well. Yeah, Lisa?
About the inspections, why hasn't the government made the whole United States have vehicle inspections?
Well, then you get into federal law and state law. I mean, you know, it's our system of government, that's all. You know, I mean, this is what the Civil War was fought over. You know, I mean, how you know, what rights does the federal government have, and what jurisdiction do the states have? I mean, that's something that's really, and it differs from state to state. I mean, that's a whole can of worms there. Anyway, this it's time to go, so I'll complete this chapter next time. Okay. So I'll see you all next time.